For the cross style of Jesus Christ. Hey, what a Jesus we have who has poured His life out for us. And I tell you, I want to embrace Him. I want to know Him. And I don't want to just imitate Him. I want to experience the very essence of His style in my life. I want Him to come and live within me, and I want Him to begin to flow His style through me until the very essence of His person can be demonstrated and known, and my world can see Jesus again on my street. Hey, this is the essence of Christianity. Anything outside of this is light, superficial. Hey, this is not performance. This is not about what I'm going to do. This is not about accomplishment. This is not about a list of rules. This is not about things that I got to pull off. This is not about gritting my teeth, striving. This is not about the strain of religion. This is about the relaxing, the dying, the resting, the leaning, the depending, the surrendering, the allowing all that He is to begin to do in me what He wants to do. Oh, I want to experience Him in that kind of depth. I want to know the wonder of the living Christ living in me. We've been investigating the cross style of Jesus Christ by going to the Scriptures. Where else could you go? For it's here that we find it in page after page after page. See, the whole book of Matthew is soaking in this. Hey, revealing itself through every single verse, coming out of every single word, moving through every single story and intent. Every encounter that He's got, it all seems to come back to this one single thing. Oh, we've talked about it. Hey, it's in this section that we find the first prediction of His death and His resurrection. We're looking at Matthew chapter 16. The first prediction of His death and His resurrection is given to us. And the language is so specific because it tells us distinctly that He's going to, from this point on, talk about nothing, absolutely nothing else. Oh, He began His ministry preaching, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." But now His ministry is unfolded. He's begun to see in clearer terms. Something deeper is taking place in His life, and He's only got one thing to talk about, and it's the style of the cross. And He's calling His disciples to that style. He has taken them aside for 6 months, the last 6 months of His ministry. These, in essence, are the last words of His very being. Hey, He's got 6 months left to get through to them. 6 months left to tell them that which matters and is really important. 6 months left to really drill within them the significant thing. What is it that He's going to talk about? He's going to talk about the style of the cross. He's going to talk about the essence of bleeding, suffering, and dying. The very wonder of losing your life. He's got nothing else to talk about at all. Now, we've been looking at it in the form of mysteries. There are these 4 powerful mysteries, and we're looking at the third one. The first one, of course, was the mystery of His person, which takes you from verse 13 down through verse 16. The second one, of course, was the mystery of His project. It's the church. He's wanting to build something. He's wanting an expression of what He is. In other words, what He is now to be expressed through what we are. We see the Father being expressed through Him. He wants to now express Himself through us. We are to become His body. We are the little detached stones built upon the foundation of the Word itself. And out of us there begins to flow the living Word, manifesting the written Word so that all might see. So you see, it's the demonstration of the reality of the style of the cross. Now we're looking at the third mystery. And the third mystery is really significant. It may be something of the heart of the whole thing, because it's here that He talks about the mystery of His program. How are we going to pull it off? How is it going to be done? What is the method? What is the means? And of course, the method and means is not a do method. It is an attitude, relaxed, depending, state kind of doing. It is the doing versus the responding kind of thing. It's the constant response to the Christ Himself. And I want you to look with me again at Matthew chapter 16 and the mystery of His program. This will be our last time to look at this mystery of His program. For the next class session, we'll begin to move into the mystery of His project, which is exciting material. It actually begins at verse 24, and if you have the red letter edition of the Scriptures, you'll note that it's all in red letters, because this whole section from verse 24 to the end is spoken by Jesus Christ. Be rest assured, we do not have all that He said at this time. Oh, wish we did. It would produce a mammoth study, no doubt. For this obviously went on for something like 6 long days as they discussed these kind of things. So this was something of a 6-day discourse as Jesus discussed all of this. And it's summarized up in 6 verses for us. But it's a powerful study, and we're anxious to get into the actual words of Jesus as he begins to express it. And maybe I'm stalling from getting into this, what we must talk about today, because it's such a negative. You see, as you come to the mystery of his program, he states it in verse 21 clearly, exactly what the program is. It's bleeding, suffering, and dying. This definitely is his plan. This is what he has to say to us. This is what he's interested in. This is what he wants to give to us. This is his impact, the plan. And so he lays it out that he's a bleeding, suffering, dying Messiah. That nothing else is going to take place in his life except redemptive process. That he's really hooked on, all wrapped up in, got one single thrust taking place through him, and it's this bleeding, suffering, and dying. This was the only possibility for winning a world. It was leaping off of his throne, emptying himself of all that he had as God, and totally, absolutely laying himself down. So it was never about him, but it was always about others. And then he was going to call his disciples to that. For the only possibility of redemptive process spreading to our world, the only way the Great Commission is going to be accomplished is in means of bleeding, suffering, and dying. It's the loss of your life. See, evangelism is not the result of technique, not the result of slick programs, not the result of the quartet getting together, wowing the crowd. It's not the result of charismatic kinds of personalities. This whole business of redemption, this whole business of evangelism is all wrapped up in, will you bleed, suffer, and die? It's not a result of education, not a result of knowing what to say and when to say it, not a result of getting the patterns down, memorization. It's all about a bleeding, suffering, and dying. See, who will lose their life? Who will intersect their world? See, who will bring themselves to the total availability of a Christ that he might reenact his death through you so that you could bear in your body the dying of the Lord Jesus and literally experiencing the flow of his life to others as he begins to live through you, who will come to death. See, it's the call. It's the call of the cross and its style. So he highlights that in verse 21. Then he moves to verse 22. It's an awful verse as well. For you see, in verse 22, as you look at it, you begin to understand not only do we have his impact, the plan, but we have our ignorance, the plot. See, our ignorance is all wrapped up in this. And we learned, of course, that Peter wasn't trying to be mad. He wasn't trying to be mean. He was just ignorant. He didn't know what he was saying. He was relying on his own thought process. He was relying on the traditions of the past, what he'd always heard, the things he'd always learned. He had not clued in listening to the dynamic of the words of Jesus. And so we see in this tremendous verse, verse 22, that he's ignorant, but the problem is, ignorance seems to always turn into arrogance. For when you are ignorant, you become arrogant, thinking you know it all. And there's nothing more ignorant than thinking you know it all, which of course is arrogant, which is really ignorant. So ignorance is all over the passage. God, save me from that. Save me from that. Make me a seeker. Make me one who's longing to know. Make me one who's teachable. Make me one who, Jesus can't talk to me for 6 solid days and I just argue with him about it. I want to, speak Jesus, I'm listening, for I am available to the movement of your Spirit and for the impact of your mind upon my heart and my thought process. I want to think like God. So we've got our ignorance. It's the awfulness of turning into arrogance. And then he brings us, of course, to verse 23. Now, verse 23 is Satan's influence, the persecutor. Now, I don't want you to think in any way that we're saying that Peter was demonic possessed. I'm not trying to say that Satan had come and possessed him. But you see, there's this element, this idea, and we're going to study this more forcibly in chapter 18, but there's this idea that there are these handles in our lives, And these handles, Satan is allowed to come along and grab a hold of those handles, and he influences us and certainly uses us when we die 1,000 deaths. We don't want that to happen. We're desperate that that would not take place. Oh, we're horrified to think that it could, but see, the handles make it possible. The handles in our life, the foothold that the devil can come and just get a hold of. He can just begin to influence us. He doesn't dominate us, doesn't control us, doesn't fill us, but he begins to influence us, and he creates something in and through us that is the opposite of what we really want. And again, it horrifies us to think of the possibilities of that. Oh, I don't want that to take place in my life. I don't want one single essence of my life where Satan could come and use me and utilize me for his own ends. I want to be totally, absolutely utilized for the glory of the sovereign God, for the Christ to manifest himself through me. And to think of this demonic thing, that the devil could come along and grab a hold of me and manipulate me, and even though I had good intentions and even though I meant well, I could be manipulated into a position where I'd have satanic influence. Oh, horrifies me. Jesus, don't let that happen in my life. Bring me to such death. Bring me to such of the essence of the cross. Bring me to the aliveness of your person, that, hey, there would be not one single handle, not one single toe hold, not one single ounce of my life that could be brought under the control and the domination of the demonic forces. That's what you're dealing with in verse 23. To get the flow of the whole thing, let's read it again. Let's begin at verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, be killed, be raised the third day. And then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you. But he turned, Jesus turned to Peter and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. Did you notice what had happened in the verse? Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me. Oh, the word offense is very strong there. It literally means to be a stumbling block. Again, we're going to study this word more forcibly in Matthew chapter 18, because it's in one particular paragraph that Jesus gives a strong warning that no doubt is a playoff of what happened here. So you see this word offense showing up here in this chapter, then you see it again in chapter 17 verse 27, and then you see it again strongly emphasized in chapter 18 from verse 6 through 9. So this becomes a very important concept. And again, we're going to save the bulk of that truth for that study in Matthew chapter 18. But as you look here, he's literally saying, Peter, you don't understand what's going on, Peter. You are under satanic influence. You are being used by the devil to literally stand in my way. You are being used of Satan as a stumbling block to cause me to stumble in the direction, on the path that the divine God has got for me. Hey, Peter, you better back off, son. You don't know what you're doing, boy. Hey, you better run from this, because you are literally becoming a stumbling block to the redemption of the world. Oh, I'm tempted to talk about that. See, that's such a strong concept. Again, the horrifying idea that we could literally, we could evangelize, we could preach, we could sing, we could give our time, we could get our effort, and when it comes right down to it, what was going on all the time? Satan was using us, making us a stumbling block to the redemption of the world, and we actually became a hindrance to the redemption and the salvation of our world, and people did not get into the kingdom because to get in, they had to go over the top of us. Horrifying to think about. Just digs at my heart. I just can't hardly stand the thought of it. And I don't want that for you. Hey, wouldn't it be something if we could be raised up by a sovereign God? Oh, raised up by the power of the Spirit to actually be a flow of the life of Jesus, so that there would be not 1 ounce of our life that would be a stumbling block. Every single moment, every single action, single thing we did would be evangelism. And the whole life would be a flow, a reflection, a push, a drawing, a tremendous impact of the power of God, bringing people to redemptive process. Man, I want that. Got to have that. Hey, that has to be, oh Jesus, whatever it takes to do that in my life, let it be. Got to have that in my life. Just absolutely have to have that. I want to go back to verse 23 now. We're entitling this, Satan's Influence, the Persecutor. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men." Now again, I don't want to leave the wrong impression. I'm certainly not putting Peter in the same position as Judas, for instance. There is a contrast, no doubt, set up between them that you need to look at and probably have saturated in. Judas, of course, became demon-possessed. There's no question that the evil one, it says, came upon him, moved within him, began to direct him in direct ways. Peter never reached that place. Come on, hey, that's not Peter's situation. Peter is ignorant, there's no question about that. And as we've already viewed in verse 22, so he's not on the same plane as Judas and the betrayal that took place there. Yes, Peter was there. Peter certainly played an influence, and Peter certainly denied 3 times. In his weakness, he certainly denied 3 times. He slept during the Garden of Gethsemane, and if you sleep during prayer meeting, you deny later. It seems to be a pattern, so we understand that kind of action, but hey, it's not on the same plane as Judas. You can study that through. See, Peter is definitely interested in saving his own skin. Peter is definitely protecting himself. Peter is wrapped up in himself. Peter has filled with his self-sovereignty. Peter is thinking about himself and protecting himself, and all of that's taking place. But see, there's this other element in the life of Peter as well. He really wants to be loyal to Jesus. He really wants to be in the truth. He really wants to be faithful. And he thinks in verse 22 that he's saying something of the right kinds of things. It's according to his tradition and what he's always heard. And you know, in the Garden of Gethsemane there were some high moments. Hey, they came, all the soldiers came, and all the people, and the place was lit up with torches in the night hour. Peter had just awakened out of his sleep, and as he awakened out of his sleep and looked and saw the whole scene of what was going on, he was so startled. You know what he did. Man, if he'd have thought, he wouldn't have done it. He reached down, grabbed a hold of his sword, yanked it out, and tried to defend Jesus. See, it was a defense thing. But again, it was just ignorance. It was, hey, if he'd have thought, he'd have known, he couldn't have done anything about it. And then Jesus had to rebuke him again and say, put that thing away. We're not living by the power of the sword, because if you live by the power of the sword, you die by the power of the sword, man. We want to live by the power of the Spirit to make an impact in our world. So, hey, get off that, Peter. So again, Peter was ignorant in his action, and it wasn't that he was trying to save himself necessarily, although that probably was involved. But you see, it was the whole scene of waking up, and there it was, and he's just ignorant. And of course, that ignorance moved into carnality. Of course, he's carnal, and it's seen in the very reactions again of saving himself and thinking about himself, and the denial was all about that. And you see the carnality of Peter, especially when you see it reflected over against the fullness of the Spirit. So on the one hand, you've got a contrast set up. On the one hand, you've got the carnality of Peter. On the other hand, you've got this fullness of the Spirit of God that rests in Jesus. Huh. What a contrast that is. Peter, of course, had some fine moments, didn't he? Oh, we studied that, of course, back in verse 16. He jumps to his feet and says, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God." That was phenomenal, wasn't it? You've been messing around in the mind of God. What a fine moment. Now we've come and hit the extreme opposite, the very bottom. You can't go any lower than this. And how low is it? Under the influence of the demonic. Satan's influence. Hey, being used by the devil. Hey, being used by God, being used by the devil. And in just a few hours, Peter goes from one to the other. Just that quick, man. Doesn't that frighten you? Doesn't that put you on your knees? Doesn't that say to you, I've got to be spiritually sensitive. I've got to be all wrapped up and focused. I've got to be concentrated in the fullness of the Spirit every single moment of my life. The lowest to the highest. The mind of God, the mind of Satan. Being used by God to make a great decree that's going to echo through the histories of the church down to, oh my, being used of Satan to stand as a stumbling block for the redemption of the world. Man, how do you compare it? So I want you to look at me at verse 23 and look in terms of a contrast between Jesus on the one hand and Peter on the other hand, and see the Spirit-filled life over against the self-centered carnal, yes, ignorance, but moved into arrogance, which is all an expression of carnality, thinking you know when you don't know, and not having an openness to say, oh, I'm willing to be changed. Jesus, break us of that. So you've got the fullness of the Spirit of Jesus and the dynamic of all of that over against the self-centered carnality, the nature of sin which produces the handles that allows Satan to get a hold of us and use us. It's our self-centered carnal mind. You see it in the passage itself. Let me give you a little outline. Start with this. Number one, discrimination. The senses. Discrimination, the senses. Again, it's in verse 23. Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. Isn't it interesting that Christ in His Spirit-filledness was always sensitive to the Spirit of God? One of the things that's so characteristic about Jesus constantly throughout His entire ministry was this sensitivity. Sensitivity. Oh, sensitivity to the Spirit of God. We call that responding. Again, it's the constant listening. It's the, oh, I'm ready to be moved. Oh, it's the, how do you want to direct me? What do you want to do through me? See, it's not the control. I've got it down. I'll master it. Hey, I know what I'm doing. I've had the experience. I know the direction. I know how to pull this off. It's the constant resting, the constant yieldedness, the constant responding. Oh God, I'm available. Come on, I'm responding to you. I want to be sensitive to the movement of your Spirit. How do you want to do it through me? What do you want to do? See, Jesus gave expression to this kind of stuff all the time. He literally talked about this. For instance, in John, if you want to turn there, it would probably be good for you to see it yourself. It's in John chapter 5 again. For it's that chapter that we have looked at in other classes, but in John chapter 5, you need to look at it again. Jesus is giving a discourse. They have gotten to the point, the Pharisees have, misunderstanding totally what He said, thinking that He was making Himself equal with God because He said God was His Father in verse 18. Right at the end of the verse 18, making Himself equal with God. So they were all upset, and Jesus said, no, you're not getting this. See, if you think I'm saying I'm equal with God, I'm not saying that. Hey, look at me, man. What I'm trying to do is here, I'm trying to tell you that the Son, look at verse 19, most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of Himself. Well, isn't Jesus God? Yes, He is. But see, He's totally surrendered Himself to God. He gave up all He had as God, became a total man. As a total man, offered Himself back to God so God the Father could fill Him. And He's only responding, sensitive, responding to the Spirit of God. And He can do nothing of Himself because He always has to be nudged and directed and receive insight from, because He's constantly sensitive to the Spirit of God. Now, you see that also in the rest of the expression in verse 19. Most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of Himself. but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he, the Father, does, the Son also does in like manner. Don't you understand? The Father and the Son, hey, we're linked, man. And I'm just constantly watching the Father. And whatever the Father does, however he loves, that's how I love. Whatever he does, that's what I do. Wherever he goes, that's where I go. In fact, he's doing that in me. See, this is not Father over there and I'm here. This is Father has come to live within. And in the fullness of the Spirit, I'm constantly looking, sensitive to the slightest movement. I'm the glove into which he has put his hand, and I'm constantly sensitive to the slightest movement that I might move in the direction he's moving, be what he is, do what he does, think the way he thinks, love the way he loves, flow with him, so that he is literally doing it in and through me. And whatever he does, I want to be involved in doing that same thing because he is doing it. And I'm just sensitive to the movement of the Spirit of God. See, that was the life of Jesus. You remember the scene, and there were so many of them we could name, but you remember the scene of the washing of the feet of the disciples. They've come into the upper room. They're standing against the wall. The supper is prepared, but they're not sitting down to eat because they haven't had their feet washed, because no servant was at the door hired to wash their feet. Wasn't in the budget, you know. Didn't have the money. And so they're just all standing there because not one of them is willing to stoop to play the servant role, because whoever did that would be admitting you're bigger than better than I am. And in their self-centered carnality, hey, they won't do that. Jesus walks in. Isn't it interesting? In one moment, he takes in the whole sight. Hey, and he knows immediately, just really intriguing to me, he knows immediately what to do. See, he doesn't have to say, well, listen, guys, I need to pray about this. He doesn't later say, I wish I'd, now that I think about it, I wish I'd have done. See, that's the way I am most of the time. I wish I'd have said, well, I wish I'd have gotten a bowl and towel and washed their feet. That would have been a good lesson for them. Man, I missed that one. See, he doesn't do that. He moves in. He doesn't have to pray about it. He doesn't have to search the Scriptures. What's the will of God in this? Hey, what's going on? No, instinctively inside, the very flow of what's happening to him, he is sensitive to the Spirit of God, and he just seems to know what to do. He just immediately goes over, strips himself, grabs a towel, girds his loins with that towel, takes the servant garb. He's not play acting. He is the servant, man. This is not, well, I'll put on a little performance for you. This is, I am the servant. I've become that servant. And literally gets the bowl and washes their feet because he was sensitive to the Spirit of God. So you see that in the life of Jesus over and over and over again. Everywhere you turn in the Scriptures, he's just sensitive. He just seems to know what to say, when to say it. Timing is exactly right. Remember in John, they tried to get him to go up to the feast of the Passover. Come on, Jesus, go up to the feast. Come on, hey, go up there and do your thing, you know. Do some miracles and have a big time. Let people know who you are. Yeah, I'll claim your fame. Come on, man. Hey, get with the program. But Jesus said, hey, it's not time. I'm sensitive to the Spirit. And I'm not, you guys go on up, but I'm not to go yet. He was sensitive to the Spirit of God. Man, how are you and I going to get that? We're going to have to be filled with the Spirit and absolutely come to the total loss of our lives, the style of the cross. See, it's the style of the cross that has that kind of sensitivity. It's the style of the cross that knows something of the wonder of that walk. See, the style of the cross is not something I produce. See, it's not a new list of rules. Get it, man? It's not a new religious approach. Hey, it's not a new wrinkle on things. Don't you understand? It's the fullness of the Spirit. It's God coming to live within you. And automatically, as you become sensitive to the Spirit and He begins to live His life through you, the style, this is the way you think. This is the way you flow. This is the way you operate. This is what goes down within you. You can't help yourself. Why? You're being sensitive to the Spirit. See, Jesus was sensitive to the Spirit, man. The minute anything appeared that was contrary to the Spirit of God, it was like an alarm going off. It was like a red flag in his face. See, he smelled it, he sensed it, he was sensitive to the Spirit, and anything contrary to the will of the Spirit, anything contrary to what God was about, just was an automatic alarm, man. It was it was there. He could tell it. He didn't have to struggle with it. He knew it. Hey, Peter shows up, begins to argue with him. Hey, Jesus immediately knows that, hey, this is not in the plan of the Spirit. This is not Spirit-led. See, he could smell it. He was sensitive. What's Peter sensitive to? Jesus is sensitive to the Holy Spirit. Well, what's Peter sensitive to? His 5 senses. Oh, you see it in the passage. Yeah, Peter is quick to respond to the flesh. What he can see, what he can hear, what he can taste, what he can feel. See, he's quickly responding to the flesh. Man, this really comes close to home, doesn't it? See, what he's sensitive to is the flesh. How's it going to affect me? What's this going to do to me? How's this going to make me feel? What's this going to do to my circumstances? How can I benefit? What do I need to accomplish in order to make myself better, and how I can operate better and get what I want and hold more influence and be more powerful? And see, he's all wrapped up in that stuff. Constant sensitive to the flesh. See, the minute anything shows its head, the minute anything appears that is against the flesh, oh, hey, Peter senses it. Peter's all right up for air. See, that's what's going on in the passage. Jesus has just told them, verse 21, about bleed, suffer, and die. Pour your life out. Hey, this is the kind of Messiah I am. And immediately, oh, Peter senses that this is not of the flesh. This is not going to be conducive to the flesh. This is not going to make me feel better. This is not going to give me comfort. This is not going to put me on a throne. This is not going to give me power and prestige. This is not going to give me health and wealth. This is not going to satisfy my body drives. This is not going to make me give me comfort and ease. This is not going to save me. Oh, see, he's so sensitive to that. Because he's sensitive to the flesh, the carnal, the self. He's sensitive to the flesh. So you got the contrast. Jesus is sensitive to the Spirit. Peter is sensitive to the flesh. And that's what caused Peter in verse 22 to immediately leap out and say, hey, take him aside, brother, take him aside and rebuke him. Because he was quick to respond to the flesh. I was thinking about how often we say, well, I know the Bible says, but you can't do that today. We're sensitive to the flesh. Oh, that wouldn't work now. Sensitive to the flesh. Well, you got to adapt that and change that. Yeah, I know, he came to a rich young ruler and said, go and sell all you've got and give to the poor. But hey, well, he didn't really mean that. I mean, after all, see, and by the means of the flesh, we reinterpret, we restructure, we change, we save, we save our flesh. Our senses, our body drives. We protect, we guard. Why? Because, see, we're sensitive to the flesh. Because if you really did what the Scriptures tell you to do, oh man, you'd cause trouble, and that wouldn't work in the ministry. Well, a lot of people would get upset if you preached that. Well, I can't. Well, no. Hey, yeah. Well, better ease over the top of that. After all, got to keep the doors open for ministry, and so we go the route of least resistance. Yeah, we just kind of flow, you know. But see, the cross is always counter-cultural. See, the cross always goes against the culture of our hour. Don't care what your culture is. Don't care where you're from. Don't care what you are involved in. I can promise you that the cross and its style will yell out at you. It will scream at your culture and demand changes. We've experienced that all over the world. Hey, in Africa they turn to us and say, "What? But you don't understand. That's an American idea." Hey, but in Africa, our culture is like this, and that doesn't fit into our culture. Hey, this is not about culture, man. This is about Bible. This is not about protecting our flesh, our comfort, the way we set up our culture, our traditions. This is about Bible and what He's called us to. And the cross is always counterculture. It always goes against the culture. It always takes a knife and just slices the culture right down the middle. It always divides. There's no way out of that, see, if you're going to be involved in the cross style of Christ. Expected. See, the methods of the flesh. Well, yeah, but hey, you got to do some of this in order to... No, you don't. Hey, no, you don't. Are we going to be sensitive to the Spirit? Are we going to be Spirit-filled and die to ourselves? Are we going to be flesh, senses-oriented, listening to our flesh? What's conducive? What makes me feel good? How will it benefit me? See, it's a call. And you see it so contrasted in the life of Jesus. Jesus is sensitive to the Spirit of God. Where's it going to take him? Bleed, suffer, and die. Peter is responsive to the flesh. Where's that going to take him? Rebuking Jesus, sleeping in prayer meeting, denying 3 times. Hey, make your choice, man. Make your choice. Want to impact your world? Want to redeem your society? Then there's no way to do it outside of the cross. It's His program. It's the way it's going down. There's no possibility outside of it. It's what He's calling us to. Let me give you another idea. We're talking about Satan's influence, the persecutor, from verse 23. Peter's right in the middle of it. Not demon-possessed, but certainly being used as an influence, Satan's influence, to create a stumbling block for Jesus. We looked at the idea of discrimination, the senses. See, Jesus, it's a contrast between Jesus and Peter. And Jesus, of course, is sensitive to the Spirit of God, while Peter, of course, is sensitive to the self-centered carnality, the flesh. And the minute anything goes contrary to the Spirit of God, hey, an alarm goes off in Jesus, and He's very much aware of it. The minute anything goes against the flesh, the comfort zone, the self, oh, Peter's immediately aware of it, and he's rebuking. You see it in the passage. Now, there's another thing I want you to note. Determination. Not only discrimination, the senses, but determination, the study. Did you see it in the last part of verse 23? But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me." Get this. "For you are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men." You are not mindful of the things of God, but of the things of men. That's an interesting statement, isn't it? Mindful. Has the idea of thought process, of course. Has the idea of study. Now, we're not talking about study in terms of education or study in terms of getting up, studying for an exam. We're not talking about memorization here. We're not talking about education. We're talking about mind time. Wouldn't it be interesting to go back into your life and have a record, a computer readout of your brain, and all the thoughts, lump them into categories like sexual thoughts, like thoughts about what you're going to wear, like thoughts about clothing, about food, what we're going to eat, thoughts about gaining, greedy thoughts, what can I get, materialism, categories, and have a computer readout and have the amount of time you've spent in your lifetime thinking about those things. I believe it would be embarrassing. Oh, here would be the Scriptures, and here would be fellowship with God, and here would be prayer, and how much time that compared to, you know what the prayer deal is. We pray 15 minutes, that's 1/4. That's 1/3, man. We pray 20 minutes, say, that's 1/3. 1/3 of 1/24 of a day. And think we've done something great. See, time, what you spend your mind on, time, mind thought process, what's going down in your mind. See, that's what this mindful of the things of God, mind time, what you think about. Hey, Peter, you do not have mind time with God. See, you've got mind time with self and flesh, and you're all wrapped up in that, Peter. You give your mind time to think about that. Now, that's in a contrast, remember, with verse 17, when Jesus turned to him and said, "Oh, you've had mind time with the Father." Yeah, this, hey, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Where did you get that? You got that from the Father. You did not get this from mind time on the flesh. You got that from mind time in God. See, God was able to reveal this. You had moments when you were literally thinking God's stuff. Now you've slipped back, Peter, and what are you doing? You're in the mind time about things of yourself. You're thinking the things of men. See, you're operating on, well, it's not bad. Hey, come on, this is not about right and wrong, good or bad. We're not, well, it's not wrong to think about. And you're right. It's not wrong to think about. Hey, and you name whatever you want to name. It's not wrong to think about, hey, what am I going to wear? And hey, where are we going to eat? And it's not that that's evil. Come on. Hey, that's life. We have to eat. We have to have a place. We have to, hey, we're not talking about that being evil. It's not about right and wrong. It's about mind time, man. Hey, your whole focus, Peter, is all wrapped up in. You're thinking the thoughts of man. You're all wrapped up. See, you haven't gone to the higher level where you're thinking the thoughts of God. Now, contrast that with Jesus. Here's Peter. He's thinking the thoughts of man. What's Jesus? Jesus is thinking the thoughts of God. What are those thoughts? Bleed, suffer, and die. Hey, that's the heart of God. Bleed, suffer, and die. Pour your life out. Give yourself up. See, Jesus was always thinking those thoughts. Jesus was constantly thinking redemptive. Oh, to be redemptive. Oh, how can I redeem? See, it wasn't preparation for a sermon. See, it wasn't, well, oh yeah, I got to preach tomorrow night. Well, man, I better think some good thoughts. So you pray and you study, and see, it's not, no, it's not that. It's, oh, Jesus, I want my whole mind. I want to saturate in your presence. I want to saturate in your word. I want the living word, the written word to literally engulf me, and I want to be all wrapped up in that, and I want nothing but your thought process. I want to always think the thoughts of God. Now, I want you to carefully walk through this with me. See, it isn't that the playing ball is wrong. It isn't that watching TV is evil. It isn't that, hey, telling a joke is bad. It's that somehow, some way, in the middle of that activity, there must be the mind of God. In other words, you could tell jokes, play ball, watch TV, and be mindful of the things of man. Or you could tell jokes, watch TV, and play ball, and be mindful of the things of God. See, just doing those things or thinking about those things, it's not what makes it mindful of man. It's the inside focus. It's the inside heartbeat. You got to get that, man. See, because this is not, well, I'll just sit around and read the Bible and always quote the Bible and never think about anything that isn't the Bible. That's not true. Hey, you're not going to minister to your world. See? Oh, come on, man. This is about getting Jesus right slap dab in the middle of your job, right slap dab in the middle of your thought process. See, we're always talking about this because this is so essential. This is having the mind of Christ in your world. In the activity of the way He's made you, in the expression of your personality, in the dynamic of the direction in which you're going. See, this is not about never own anything. This is never about never possess anything. This is never about not play ball. This is not about not go fishing. This is not, come on, this is about Jesus slap dab in the middle of that kind of thing until you're thinking the thoughts of God, redemptive process. See, bleed, suffer, and die in the midst of it all. Because those things become the platform from which Jesus can literally launch His presence into your world. So your job doesn't distract you from Jesus. Doing your job literally is the platform that exposes you to hundreds of people who are all around you, which give you the opportunity of the mind of Christ literally penetrating their lives. So in the middle of your job, you're being mindful of the things of God. See, but Peter, he was doing all of those things mindful of the mind time. Hey, it was mind filled with self, mind time filled with self thoughts, mind time all focused on, it's all about focus, man. So you got to get that concept. See, holiness is really radical. See, holiness calls us to think like God. See, holiness doesn't call you to think less of yourself. Holiness calls you to think not of yourself at all. For Jesus might literally dominate your mind, and that He might permeate your thought process, and your whole thought process would be the mind time of God. So this is your one focus. This is your one drive. This is what possesses you. This is what masters you, which is what verse 23 is all about. Again, Peter, you are mindful of the things of men, not the things of God. Jesus was constantly mindful of the things of God, which spilled the cross style through every single thing he did, from going to weddings, to ministering to rich young rulers, to telling stories around the campfire. Everything was about mindful of the things of God. Peter, hey, he's drawing out a sword, cutting off an ear, man. Hey, he's denying 3 times. Hey, he's rebuking Jesus, telling Jesus he doesn't know what he's talking about in one breath, while in just a little while ago he said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And what's his problem? He's mindful of the things of men. Let me give you one more idea from verse 23. Of course, there's the idea of discrimination, the senses. See, what are you sensitive to? Jesus was sensitive to the Spirit, constantly listening to the Spirit. Hey, Peter was constantly listening to the flesh. Hey, in verse 23, there is the idea of determination, the study. Hey, what was Peter studying? The things of men. What was Jesus constantly studying? The things of God. Made the difference. It wasn't a matter of activity, it was a matter of what they studied, what they gave their mind time to. What do you think about? What are you really into? What burns within you? What's your focus? Let me give you a third one. Direction, seeing. So you got discrimination, the senses, determination, the study, direction, the seeing. Now, the interesting thing about all that's going on in the contrast between Jesus and Peter in this passage is the fact that Jesus definitely has a view which is eternal. Peter has a view which is temporal. So you're always getting into this in the Scriptures, that Jesus somehow looks beyond, see? Somehow looks beyond the immediate, somehow looks beyond the temporary, somehow looks beyond what you can handle and feel right now, somehow looks beyond this particular moment and goes into an eternal thought process, sees the long range, the long view. Hey, direction, where we're going, what's it going to accomplish? Not just the discomfort of the hour, not just the unpleasantness of this moment, not just, oh, something is happening now and I'm not going to go through that, but hey, where am I going to go? What's going to be 50 years from now? What's going to be 100 years from now? How is this going to matter? What's the significance of this? What's going to take place? The eternal perspective. Man, do you understand how important that is? See, Peter was into the temporal, the temporary. Hey, here he was, see? But then that again all fits, see? He's sensitive to the things of the flesh, self-centered carnality. He's all wrapped up in his mind time, in the things of men. And men always think in terms of immediate, now, right this moment. How am I get? Hey, think about tomorrow some other time. But right now, this moment, see, eternity isn't in the view. See, the devil will trick you with that. See, this is not about walking into a situation and thinking, how can I solve this immediate problem? This is about, hey, what will be the results 50 years from now? Where is this whole thing going? How can I impact? How can I change? How can I minister? How can I be redemptive forever? How can I help solve, lift up? See, you can solve a problem and bam, it's over and that's done, and split a church right down the middle. Or you can say, hey, what about 50 years from now? What about the eternal thing? What is the redemptive? Be sensitive to the Spirit in terms of, hey, Father, what do you want to do? Give me the view of eternity. And you know it's absolutely impossible to have the view of eternity without the mind of the Father, because He alone knows. See, that's why cross style is so important, because the style of cross is all about, hey, dying to yourself and living His life, and that's the eternalness, that's the eternal aspect of the whole thing. And don't think for one single moment that cross style is temporary. Jesus is still living the cross style. It's the eternal style forever. Hey, that would drive you to your knees. See, self style, hey, all wrapped up in yourself, grabbing for yourself, solving the immediate problem, getting for this moment, that's temporary, man. that'll soon be over. Hey, and it's done, son, just that quick. But this eternal thing is all about the style of the cross. Come on, guys. The fundamental of the kingdom of God is never ever live for yourself. Pour your life out. Die to yourself. Lose your life. That's the fundamental. And it's the only possibility you've got of thinking the eternal thoughts. Oh, give me the mind of Christ. Man, I've got to have His thought process. I want the mind of Christ. I want Him to inject His mind, His brain, His thought process into mine. I want Him to give me His eyes so I can see things through His perspective. I want to know what He knows and see what He sees. I want Him to come and share His wisdom. See, I'm tired of operating on my wisdom in the temporal ideas. I want to know the flow of the eternal. I want what happens in my life to matter forever. I don't want to bring a hammer down for a moment. I want to bring a hammer down forever. See, I don't want to just affect for a time. I don't want to put Band-Aid on cancer and make you feel better, man. I want the divine surgery of God to take place in our lives until the eternal is affected forever. See, that's the issue. It's all about the style of the cross. Oh, take a warning from Peter. Hey, let's take a warning from Peter. Jesus or Peter, where are you?